You know, I was telling a group the other day that what really separates great nations, great businesses, great teams, great individuals is that difference that sometimes is not great. It's the difference in people who say somebody oughta and those who say I'm gonna. You know, there's a lot of people that say, you know, somebody ought to do something about that. Somebody ought to write a letter to the editor. Somebody ought to run for office. Somebody ought to write a check. Somebody ought to man one of these booths. Somebody ought to sign up for the military and go serve us on the front lines of freedom. Somebody ought to do something. While they sit back and wait for that somebody ought to step forward. But what set America apart, past, present, and future, has been those folks that do step forward. And not just say somebody ought to do this, but step forward and say, I'm gonna run for office. I'm gonna put my body between those terrorists and my family. I'm gonna stand up and speak out. I'm gonna go to a Tea Party rally. I'm gonna donate money. I'm gonna volunteer in a campaign. I'm gonna speak to my church group. I'm gonna speak to my coworkers. I'm gonna make a difference for America, and every one of you is in the I'm gonna crowd because you're here, not sitting at home. Every great moment in American history was done by I'm gonna people, not somebody oughta people. And every generation has been confronted with challenges. The founding fathers, when they signed that Declaration of Independence, and might I add, they read it. They read every word, they argued every comma, they looked at every period and fly speck on the page. Because when they signed their names, and they talked about liberty and independence and freedom, they weren't just talking about words that polled good or sounded good on Fox News. They were signing their names to a document that meant guys in red coats down the street would be happy to hang them by the nearest tree. They read every word. They didn't say, hey, we'll just fill in some of this stuff later. Thomas Jefferson will fill in some later. Just go ahead and sign it. We'll call Nancy Pelosi and we'll figure this out after we pass it. Can you even imagine that conversation with Ben Franklin and John Adams and those guys? This was serious business. This was serious, deadly business. But they stepped up. It was a tough time. It was a challenging time. We had other tough times. The War of 1812. We had tough times in the Civil War where at places like Antietam and Sharpsburg and right here through this courthouse, the Civil War came right to the front steps of Murfreesboro. And blood was shed in these very streets. Places like Eastern Europe and Germany. I don't know if you're watching Pacific on HBO and watching the island-to-island battles that took place in the Pacific during World War II. We watch the sanitized version of war today on television and don't understand the horror of what happened at D-Day on that beach or in those islands when freedom was truly hanging in the balance for the world. In Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq. Every step in our country's history, people have stepped forward and said, I'm gonna. And we've had tough times, and every time we've risen to the challenge, not because America is great. And I know that sounds a bit shocking. It's not because we're great as a country, it's because individually we're great, and together we can and have done and will do anything. It's the individual person who says, I'm gonna do something and then steps out of the nation. That's what America is. And what separates us from the rest of the world is that all the people who come here that share that spirit, that share that DNA from our founders to now, can legitimately claim that they are a part of that history, past, present, and future. You know, Newt Gingrich is a guy who loves history, and Newt is the greatest political strategist, I think, of our time. But he's also a great historian. And he points out that one of the things that really sets America apart is truly that it is in our DNA to be independent and freedom-loving and don't tell me what to do. And when you think about it, and he points out that the people who came and founded this nation were folks that were in England and had a king and had rulers, and they said, you got a king, you got rulers, I'm out of here. I'm going somewhere where there isn't anybody there. And then our ancestors, a lot of places just like this, they'd be working in the fields and all of a sudden they notice a little smoke coming up over the next hill and they go, somebody's just built a cabin over there. And they think to themselves, you know, that means somebody's gonna be building a town, they're gonna start electing mayors, they're gonna start telling me what to do. I'm going further west. And our ancestors moved west and west and west every time they saw a little smoke coming up from the chimney of the next cabin. Till they got to California and we had to start coming back this way because, man, they're crazy out there. They said, I don't mind the neighbors as much as I mind the crazy folks on this part. So they started coming back this way and a lot of them settled right here in Middle Tennessee. It's in our DNA to say we're separate, we're independent. You look at the cowboy movies. It's not guys going in saying, I'm going to tell you what to do in this town. All John Wayne's great movies are him saying, don't tell me what to do, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's in our DNA. And sometimes I've got two teenage boys, 17 and 14. Trust me, it's in our DNA for them to push the edge of the envelope. Daughters do it too. And sometimes we think it's teenagers. No, it's just that American DNA that's in them to just push the edge of the envelope. You know, if you go to Germany, they don't have road signs that have speed limits on their autobahn because their culture, their DNA is really disciplined and they follow the rules. And they don't put speed limits on their roads because if they put up speed limits, people would be compelled to follow them. And so their way of dealing with it is, well, don't put any signs up there because then we'd have to follow the speed limit. So they just don't put up signs. We're different here in America. We put up speed limit signs everywhere. 55, 65, 70, and what's the first thing we do when we see one of those signs? We ask ourselves, I wonder when they start writing tickets. Yeah, we live in that area between what's the rule and when do I have to pay the price for it? That's what's in our DNA, it's who we are. So should we be surprised when you look at the creativity, the out-of-the-box thinking that has made America the greatest nation in the world? It's going to be the folks that don't feel compelled to think in the box and follow the rules are the ones that make that happen. It's why we're the greatest nation in the world. We're independent, spirited, we're liberty and freedom-loving people. We don't want the government to tell us what to do. And yet we've got a government that is intent on telling us what to do because they don't understand who we are and how our culture is fundamentally American. And frankly, we've got a president who does not like it. Did you hear his comment yesterday? His latest mistake? Where he stood up, no, he didn't bow to anybody. and I haven't seen a birth certificate. I don't think anybody else has. The bottom line is that this guy yesterday, or day before yesterday, was given a speech at this national security speech and said, we are a military superpower, whether we like it or not. If anybody doubts whether we dislike, or this guy dislikes our country, who we are, our culture, he said it all right there. Whether we like it or not, we spread more freedom, more independence, more liberty, and more opportunity around this world than any other nation in the entire history of mankind. I like it, and I think the American people like it, whether our president gets it or likes it or not. You know, we hear a lot of doom and gloom these days about, America and our problems, and we've got serious problems. The president's telling us everything's hunky-dory, the economy's improved, and everything's going to be better now. Newsweek this week said, America's back! Really, I don't think they told those 484,000 people who got unemployment notices just last week. I don't think the thousands of people who got foreclosure notices just last week, the highest level in 5 years, think the economy has recovered. I don't think folks that are moms and dads that are worrying about losing their jobs, or who have family members who are worried about losing their jobs, or are seeing that the small plant in some small community, that if it goes, that community is really in deep trouble. I don't think they think America's back. And we're not going to get back following the course of countries that have failed. Following their method of madness is not going to bring America back.